All right, well, let's get started. Good morning again. Welcome to our Ontario All-Party Rare Disease Strategy Roundtable on this Global Rare Disease Day. Thrilled to be co-hosting this event along with our colleagues at CORD. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from my home in Mississauga, which is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. In particular, we acknowledge the territory of the Anishinaabeg, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, Chippewa peoples, and the land that is home to the Métis, and most recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who are direct descendants of the Mississaugas of the Credit. I want to say a quick thank you to our sponsors for today's session, GSK, Takeda, and Rare Eye, and of course, once again, our co-hosts, the Canadian Organization for Rare Disorders. And to open this session, I would like to hand it off to Ryan Locke, Director of National Policy, Federal Affairs, Government Affairs, and Market Access at GSK Canada to provide some opening remarks. Ryan, over to you.
Thank you, Jason, and good morning, everyone. And thank you for inviting me, as well as my GSK colleague, Emanuela DeFranco, to join for today's Drugs for Rare Disease Roundtable on Drugs for Rare Disease Day. We are looking forward to this morning's discussion. And, you know, this conversation we're about to embark on this morning is certainly very timely, as we do expect further details to come soon from the federal government regarding some of the announcements and funding announcements that they've made. And certainly on behalf of GSK, I do want to extend our thanks to Life Sciences Ontario for hosting this important conversation, and indeed to all of you for participating. It's very encouraging, incredibly encouraging that we have representatives from across political parties at the table here today. And for us, I think this is emblematic of exactly the sort of collaborative approach that will be needed in building a drugs for rare disease strategy for Ontario and indeed for Canada. At GSK, we believe in uniting science, talent, and technology to get ahead of disease together. And certainly the remarkable pace of scientific advancement in genomics and precision medicine that we're seeing means that we are now finally perhaps at a time in our history where it is possible to get ahead of so many rare diseases. And this, of course, as it should, offers much needed hope for Canadian patients and their families and caregivers. And it's also at times like these that we therefore need to be increasingly flexible, creative, and innovative in our health technology assessment and reimbursement processes so that we can get this new generation of treatments to the patients that need them most. And if nothing else, I think we would all agree that the experience through the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us that regulatory innovation in this country is possible, that systems can evolve and can adapt to meet the needs of patients, and that we don't have to have a one-size-fits-all solution for every drug policy challenge that confronts us. And so by playing a leadership role on policy issues like drugs for rare diseases, as this group is doing today, Life Sciences Ontario continues to show what is possible when we collaborate and we all work together. So thank you again for having us, and Jason, back over to you.
Oh, thank you, Ryan, and thanks again for GSK's generous support for this event. It's now my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this morning's session, Jane Tabor from National Public Relations. I think most of you will recognize Jane from her past work as a journalist covering Parliament Hill and her role as co-host on CTV's Question Period. Thank you, Jane, for joining us today, and over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Jason. Really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone, too, for participating on what is Rare Disease Day. We're just so on point with this roundtable. So we're going to be exploring this issue with a focus on the province, on Ontario, and where it is in terms of policy and strategy and what those opportunities are for the province. And just a couple of points before we get going. Those online can use the chat panel and the chat function to put questions to the roundtable and make comments. And so I'll try to look for those during our roundtable. And I'll ask our roundtable participants to raise your hands if you want to jump into comments. And again, I'll be watching carefully for that. And just an FYI, I want everybody to know that the MPPs who are our panelists today, they're going to be jumping off around 10:15 or so because they've got question period. So that's democracy in action. We respect that, and we're pleased that they can join us for this time. The remaining participants will be staying on the line till about 10:30 or so. So let me begin with the introductions. Natalia Kusendova is the Progressive Conservative MPP for Mississauga Centre. She's also the chair of the Standing Committee on Social Policy. Franz Jelena is a veteran NDP MPP representing the Northern Ontario riding of Nickelbelt, and she is the official opposition health critic. And John Fraser, he's the Liberal MPP for Ottawa South, and of course you'll know that he served as the party's interim leader. So those are our politicians, and now let's meet our experts. Dr. Leanne Ward is also from Ottawa. She's from the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, and she's an expert in pediatric bone health. And we have Bob Mcclay. He's joining us from the Canadian Forum for Rare Disease Innovators. We'll be talking to those two just a little bit later. But first, we've got two people who are going to kick off the roundtable with a look at the landscape. And we're going to look at it through a provincial lens, but also we want to look at it a little bit nationally, just to set the table for our conversation. So Durham Wong Rieger is well known to everyone for her work as the CEO and president of the Canadian Organization for Rare Disorders, or CORD. She's in Dubai today. So thank you, Durham, through the magic of the internet, she's joining us. And of course, you've already met Jason Field. He is the president and CEO of Life Sciences Ontario, and that's where we're starting. So Dr. Field, you wrote you and your team wrote a very comprehensive strategy for Ontario and rare diseases. And you talked in that strategy that a provincial strategy would not only save lives, but also boost Ontario's economy. So I just wanted you to give us a quick little summary of your vision for rare disease policy in the province, its contribution to the economy, and why now? Dr. Field.
Well, thanks, Jane. And as you mentioned, we did publish this report last year on how a provincial rare disease strategy can improve both the lives of patients and boost our innovative economy. This report is available on our website, so everyone can go check it out there. We titled the report "Cast Our Pebble into the Pond" because we know in order to achieve this ambitious vision, we need to start now with small but important decisions. In the report, there's a terrific story of the city council vote back in 1977 in Cambridge, Massachusetts. This was the precursor to the amazing biotech giant that is the greater Boston area today. But it took a unique confluence of events in order for that to happen. So timing is everything. And I believe that we have a very unique window of opportunity right now. COVID-19 has changed so much in the life sciences landscape. Public awareness of our sector is at an all-time high. Partnership and collaboration between academic research, industry, healthcare, and government has never been stronger. And we have a federal commitment of $500 million towards the development of a Canadian rare disease framework. So indeed, now is the time to cast our pebble into the pond. Our hope is that the tiny ripples from that pebble will grow to become this ultimate vision by 2040, where life sciences is an economic engine for Ontario, health innovation is considered an investment and not a cost, and we have systems in place for prevention, early diagnosis, and the best innovative treatments available to patients in a timely manner. We identified 5 strategic pillars that need to go into this strategy. The first is to build a workable system for patients that is driven by facts and data. Certainly, the system needs to be workable for all players, patients, governments, the health system, researchers, and their institutions and industry. The second pillar is a clear, efficient, and patient-friendly health regulatory system. Treatments for rare diseases require separate and tailored systems and rules for clinical evaluation, regulatory approval, emergency drug access, health technology assessment, and access processes. We need to stop trying to force fit rare diseases into a system that just really isn't designed for them. The third pillar is accelerated funding for rare disease diagnosis, treatments, and care. We need to structure our health system and resource it to provide patients with better access to testing and diagnosis services and the best treatments that can help them, and the supportive care and services that alleviate suffering and uncertainty. The fourth pillar is to make managing rare disease an economic development strategy. You know, spending on healthcare is so often seen as a cost that is grudgingly borne rather than an investment that is a tool for economic development. And so we need to sort of rethink how we approach health procurement. And then finally, we can't do this alone. This has to fit within the rare disease, the National Rare Disease Framework, and, you know, as well as other initiatives, you know, around major health challenges such as cancer and public health protection measures. And finally, I just want to very quickly acknowledge that everything in this report, there's nothing new here per se. A lot of this work builds on the incredible work that organizations like CORD, and I'll particularly mention their seminal rare disease strategy from 2015. You know, Durham has been tireless in her work as she's coming to us from Dubai today after, what was it, a 9-hour session, Durham. So you're an inspiration for all of us. And it's work like this that really led to the federal commitment of resources towards a rare disease framework. And now we need the provinces to prioritize rare disease as well. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jason. And yes, let's let Durham just set the table for us about what's happening nationally and how you see things going. So Durham, Wong, Rieger.
First of all, thank you very, very much for the opportunity to be here. There is nothing that makes more sense than us than partnering with, you know, innovative research. And certainly the Life Sciences Ontario is the premier organization, I think, right now that's leading that way. And everything that Jason has in those pillars is exactly what we need. I think, as Jason mentioned, I am indeed in Dubai. I'm not here on holidays. We just launched the United Nations resolution addressing the challenges of persons and families living with a rare disease, which is the acknowledgement that rare disease is in fact an important, not just a medical issue, but it's a social issue. It's an economic issue. It is in fact a educational issue, an occupational issue. It's something that actually affects people, you know, in many ways. But as we have said with this whole resolution, is that it's an opportunity to actually, as we say, invest in persons and families living with rare diseases. So the word investment comes back over and over again. We have been so fortunate, I think, in terms of having the global rare disease environment kind of coming forth at exactly the right time. I think this is the right time for Canada to move in. We launched, as Jason said, the rare disease strategy back in 2015. All of those pillars still absolutely make sense. They are the right ones. And I will say, since 2015, we have actually done work on them. It's not to say they've been sitting there. And just because it hasn't been so-called nationally endorsed or government endorsed, it does not mean that the other sectors have not been working on it, as Jason says, and as you'll hear from our clinicians and others. So this is really important. We in Canada can be an important part of what is happening globally. And right now, as you know, we've gone from having, you know, less than 10 drugs for rare diseases back in the decade before the 1980s to now more than 700. The goal is to have 1,000. The new resolution that just came out of the European Union now is that they want to make the goal of reducing diagnosis from 5 years to 6 months. That the number of new drugs will now be 1,000 new drugs that will be available. So we're looking at this being a huge enterprise on all fronts. And Canada not only can be, but needs to be a part of it. And Ontario, of course, as that leading life sciences province, can actually take a leading role. So it's exactly the right time for us to do this. And we really need to be contributing to, you know, the innovation around rare diseases, as well as being a net consumer of it.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that, Durham. Appreciate that. And now let's bring in our politicians, you know, to hear from the various parties. This is an election year in Ontario. So in fact, the election is June 2nd. And that always provides opportunities to make some noise, for the parties to make some noise in their platforms and also to make some changes. So I'm going to go to you first, Ms. Jelena, as the official opposition health critic. And, you know, is this rare disease strategy a focus for the NDP? Is it important? And of course, you are coming from Northern Ontario, where there tend to be issues about access. And that's something that we heard from Canadians when they were talking to the federal government about a rare disease strategy. They talked about having a postal code, winning a postal code lottery. So access is really very much a concern. So please address that and tell us where the rare disease strategy is as a priority for the NDP.
Well, good morning, everyone. As it was mentioned, my name is France Gelina. I'm the MPP for Nickel Belt, Big Northern Riding, and I have been the health critic for my party for the last 15 years. I also come from the healthcare system. So first, at the 40,000 feet level, I represent the NDP. Everything we put in our platform are put through the values of the NDP. So there are two of them that every single piece of our platform has to go through. It is share in prosperity. So we like the economy to grow. We want it to grow in a way that is equitable to all. And the second is social justice. So when it comes to people and family living with rare disease, we are fully aware that Ontario is failing those people. Ontario is failing those families. Yet it is hard to understand because in Ontario, we have a phenomenal health technology sector, health innovation sector. We lead the country and many other countries in what the knowledge and skills that is developed right here in Ontario that could and should help people living with rare disease as well as their family. So here we are in Ontario with the capability of helping, yet the systems don't work. So we are fully aware that the systems in place have failed and will continue to fail unless they are changed. The committee to evaluate drugs, the way we bring new technology, new drugs, new innovations to the forefront has failed the people with rare disease and will continue to do so. It needs to change. The NDP is fully aware that it needs to change. We also have some clear, I would call it pathways as to how you achieve this change. The report that was already talked about from 2015 is one. The fact that the federal government has come to the table with $500 million certainly is a game changer for many things. So we are clear as to what the end goal has to be. We have to stop failing the people of Ontario and their families who live with rare disease. How do we get there? We change the system itself. We change how new drugs become available for rare diseases. We change how technology becomes available. There are parts that are starting to be clear. We believe in centers of excellence so that the diagnostic, the treatment can be there, can be accessible. I come from Northern Ontario. It has to be equitable to all. Do I expect every center of excellence to have a site in Go-Gamma? Probably not. Most people don't know where Go-Gamma is on the map, but I do. It's in Nickel Belt. But does it have to be accessible to them? Yes, it does. It doesn't matter where you are. If you're a First Nation, if you're a new immigrant, you live in rural or Northern Ontario, it has to be available. So our end goal is clear. The problems have been identified and the strategies to get there are becoming clearer and clearer all the time.
Okay, so Ms. Jelena, then to my question, is this going to be a priority for you and your platform for the June election?
Well, I can tell you that we have just had a convention. It is something that is recognized, that is there for the NDP as to what will be the top 5 issue that we campaign on. There are people in communication that decide those things. As a party, we work from the ground up. So I can tell you that from the ground up, the NDP member have spoken that they want this to be addressed. So as an NDP government, we would put the time, effort, and energy in place to address it. Will you see it in the top 5 bulletin form issues of a campaign? I cannot tell you that. Those decisions have not been made.
All right, thank you very much for that. And we're going over to Mr. Fraser now. Dr. Eric Hoskins was a former Liberal health minister, and he introduced a provincial strategy related to rare diseases. So are we going to see this come back, Mr. Fraser, during the election campaign? If the Liberals form government, is it something that we'll see as a top priority for your team?
Well, what I can say is I was very fortunate to be Minister Hoskins' parliamentary assistant at the time when the report came out. The implementation committee was set up. We did some work around EDS clinics. I've been involved for a long time with sickle cell anemia, and working with a friend, Unita Lewis, and so understanding the needs of that community. Look, it is going to be a priority for us because we have to solve this challenge. So many people are left out of the care that they need, and so when I look at the strategy, and I do want to say something to what Jason said, is that we have to look at healthcare as being something other than a burden on the system. Because the reality is, I come from riding Ottawa South, and I've got Geo Research Institute. What Otto is to, or was to, Windsor or Oshawa, healthcare is the place where I live, where it generates wealth, it generates opportunity. And so that's the mindset that we have to take when we look at this. Solving these problems, as Durham would note, because she's been at it, they're really big challenges. And the thing that I would say to the group is that we have a history of investing in these things, investing in newborn screening, investing in Born Ontario, this strategy. And we're a small party in the legislature. We don't have a lot of resources, but the thing that we do have, I call it the generosity of our friends. So we have a large group of people who were in government for a long time and have been contributing to our platform, have been contributing to this whole process of being ready if we're given the opportunity to govern. So these are things that this is something that we were seized with in government as it came forward, and we'll have to continue. We're going to continue to do that. Now, as France said, it's one of the hardest things is government's a big thing. So when you get to a platform, sometimes you don't always see in the top 5 the thing that you're looking for. And so we went through a very large process for our platform, open mic. This did come up. And we're in the process right now of setting up a number of further consultations as what we call our health squad. So I'm not sure. I'll check with Eric. I think Court should be in that. I'll call it a consultation for just to get some sense and time for my colleagues to understand, not just myself, but my new colleagues like Nathan Stahl, like Sylvain Roy, like the health squad that we have, the great candidates that we have, to understand the challenge of rare disease and what the priorities are for Court.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Fraser. Sounds like a little hard sell. I think that Jason and Durham, I think that maybe you have your work cut out for you, because I feel like both MPPs are saying, we don't know where this is going to land in terms of a campaign, or whether, we'd see this if you did form government. So is it just to the MPPs, we're looking for, the Conservative MPP has not joined us yet, so we'll just keep chatting with France and Jean. But when you're looking at this kind of strategy, to the two of you, is it just dollars? Is it just about money and it's so expensive you feel you can't do it, or is there something else going on? So France, I'll go to you first.
No, it's not solely about dollars. Would we try to negotiate the best price possible for the new drugs? Absolutely. We have to be respectful of taxpayers' dollars, and most of the new treatments come with very high costs, and we would try to negotiate the best price possible. We would reach out to Duran and to everybody else to try to help us to put pressure on to try to negotiate the best price. But that being put aside, I think it requires quite a bit of change in our healthcare system. Our healthcare system right now is not set up to be able to diagnose, treat, and gain access to the treatment that people and their family who live with rare disease face. So this change in our healthcare system are never easy. Anybody who comes from healthcare would tell you that it's not easy. It requires quite a bit of time, effort, and energy, and this time, effort, and energy has to be there. We know we are failing them. We know we have to do better. We have set a clear objective that we have to do better. People living with rare disease have to have access to diagnostic treatment, medication, innovations that could help them. So to do this switch, we as the NDP are leaning toward center of excellence, where we would set up centers of excellence around specific families of diseases, specifically for rare disease, where people would get their diagnosis, will get their treatment, would get their support, and would gain access to the medication they need and the innovation they need to get better. But none of this exists right now. So to set this up, you need political will. I guarantee you that the NDP has the political will to do that.
Okay, Mr. Fraser, what do you say to that? And what about the cost? Is it where does that fit in your thinking about adopting a strategy?
Well, the costs are the biggest barrier to drugs. There's no question. I've been watching that for 25 years. I look back on, I can remember Fabrizyme from 15, 16 years ago, and trying to get that available and accessible for a small number of people. There's no question that's a tough nut to crack, and we're going to have to crack that. That's part of what this broader discussion is about right now. It's not just that though, and centers of excellence are a really important point. It's access to allied health professionals, access to primary care, understanding by primary care physicians or practitioners, I should say, as to the needs of people with rare people and families with rare diseases. So that's why coming out of this report, it's not drugs are a really important part. And that's always going to be tough for every government. And but if we have the support of the federal government, that should make that easier, somewhat easier. But it's also having an approach that says, okay, we need to address all of the needs for families, and that's access to primary care, access to allied health professionals. I even look at I look back at sickle cell anemia and the challenges that families had in emergency departments, right? Where the assumption of of people were looking for narcotics, right? Not fully understanding, and so that's a really important part of that strategy, because for each disease there are things that people in urgent or emergency care need to know, that primary care physicians need to know. So it's what I would say is, if you look at the intent of our government and how we move forward, we want to work with the community to keep moving that forward. And so that's the commitment. Like, I'm committed to doing that. I've been committed to doing that since I was elected, and before I was elected, working for the former premier. So I think what is important, and I'll finish this up, is for some of my colleagues who are not elected yet to fully understand this, or at least be exposed to it as candidates.
All right, thank you very much for that. I'm going to bring in Dr. Leanne Ward and Bob Mcclay now. And of course, I'd mentioned earlier that Dr. Ward is at CHEO, at the Children's Hospital in Ottawa for Eastern Ontario, and an expert in pediatric bone health. So from your perspective, Dr. Ward, and what you've heard from the politicians, what you see every day as a clinician in your clinic, how would a provincial strategy help the children that you're dealing with?
Go.
Sorry, you're on mute.
Thank you. Yeah, I think a provincial strategy would go a long way to provide a much better framework for addressing the needs of patients and families with rare diseases. Right now, we have pockets of experts in different locations with emphasis on certain diseases. And I think we need just a much larger vision and a much more coordinated approach to this whole space. I think there's been some really important touch points that have been mentioned today. The fact that families struggle with getting to the right specialists for appropriate diagnoses and getting access to the technology that they need for that. I see families struggling with fear and anxiety and frustration around that whole diagnostic process. And yet an accurate diagnosis is really the launch pad for then developing individualized care plans, which of course involve these medications. It's been alluded to that these are expensive therapies, and indeed they are. The pathway from bench to bedside for drug development is a long and a complex one. In the rare disease space, understand that there's so few patients in any one center for a given disease. You have to go multinational in order to effectuate those clinical trials, and they take a lot of investment and a lot of time. And that's frustrating for families. So I think that we need a much more global vision for how this needs to be all put together and effectuated. I think we need to be mindful of the fact that families don't have the time to wait a long period of time to get the answers that they need and access to the therapies that they need. And I think overall, this notion of centers of excellence that are equitably accessible, we can build things, but then we have to make sure people get to them. I think that's a real cornerstone to how we're thinking about this space at the present time.
Okay, thank you for that. And then let's get the perspective of Bob Mcclay. Of course, so you're a leader in the rare disease treatment developer community. You spend a lot of time in Boston, where there's a big hub, and also in Europe. So if we start to compare and contrast, what countries are working well, what's not working well, what lessons can we learn? Somebody has mentioned on the chat here about a rare disease strategy that mirrors Germany's, for example, and Jason has talked about the economics and the benefits of a rare disease strategy to Ontario's economy. So, Mr. Mcclay.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. Yeah, when Jason showed that picture of the hub in Boston of innovation, before COVID, I was flying down to Boston every week, and the on-time percentage with Air Canada for that flight back is 18%. So it's really not a fun thing to do. I'd much rather take a GO train from Burlington into downtown Toronto, if that was the center of excellence. And hopefully by 2040, Jason will be showing pictures of downtown Toronto as a real center of excellence for innovation. But we've got a long way to go. Coming from the innovative side, I've been doing this for 6 years, and when I first started, people said, go talk to Durham, go talk to other general managers of drug companies that bring in rare disease products to Canada. And the one person said to me, you're not going to be a star. On the global stage, Canada is really difficult. You're not going to do well. You're going to have to battle for resources globally, and it's not easy. You have to fight for patients, one patient at a time. You're expected to give a lot of drug away for free. So it really does make it very challenging. And when I think of my peers in the rare eye group and other industry leaders, we do battle. We battle for resources. Canada's 2% of the global pharmaceutical market. So we would be that little tiny tail wagging this massive dog. We can't change the whole global system of innovation, the whole global system of the way pharmaceuticals are developed and delivered. So we have to work within that system, and we do. We battle for patients, and we battle for resources. One thing I often say to people when they realize what I do is I said, we love our healthcare system in Canada. We're very proud of it. We brag about it globally. Mm-hmm. But I think Canadians would be mortified if they knew how we treated rare disease patients, and especially children, especially when there's a degenerative disease that progresses quickly, and we're bickering over who's paying, who's not paying, is the drug going to be approved or not? That's what breaks my heart. And that's where, we do everything we can to provide drug for free if we have to, but that's not a sustainable model. And I think, in all my time, interfacing with, HTA leaders, Health Canada, payers, a sustainable funding model is what we need, and we need to collaborate, cooperate. No one's going to win here. If the price gets really low, they don't win, because then the innovative drug doesn't come here. If our prices are too high, no one's going to pay, and the drug doesn't get here. So, let's all work together, create a predictable system, a flexible system that can get innovation to the unmet medical need that's here. And that's our biggest challenge.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to bring back in the politicians, because I just want them you, France and John, to reflect on what Bob and Leanne had to say. And also think about COVID, the last 2 years of COVID, how the pandemic may have affected strategies? Has it slowed things down? Has it shown you that maybe we can do things a little bit more efficiently and a little bit more quickly? And so that would be a great reason to, to think about being able to bring in a rare disease strategy. So I don't know who wants to go first. France, John? On that, France?
France,
Okay.
I usually defer to France because she's the official opposition, but I'll go first, whatever she likes.
I'll go. So I would say you're absolutely right. I mean, with COVID, our healthcare system has evolved and changed in ways that really you had asked me 2.5 years ago, how long do you figure it will take before Ontarians are comfortable with a telephone appointment, with over the internet appointment with their family physician or specialist? And my answer would have said, probably a decade before we can make the switch to online. And come COVID, and voila, 90% of Ontarians now feel quite comfortable receiving quite a broad number of care through telephone, online, Zoom, etc. So COVID has shown us that we are able to make change quickly in our healthcare system. That you would have asked me this before, and I did not see this feasible, yet we did it. Same thing with the mass vaccination. You would have asked me, like, how long do you figure it would take to vaccinate 12 million people in Ontario? And my answer would not have been 3 months. I can guarantee you this. Yet we did it. And we, as in the capital we, Ontario healthcare system did that. So are we able to move fast in ways that I did not expect? Absolutely, COVID proved that. How do you light that kind of emergency toward rare disease? Well, I would say COVID provided us an opportunity to do this. Many people with rare disease are at higher risk. Many people with rare disease have it really tough and their family in the last 2 years. The people of Ontario are good people. If you show them the story, if you share with them what is happening, they will want change. And when enough of us want change, well, COVID proved to us that we can get that done pretty quick.
Okay, all right, Mr. Fraser.
Great, thanks very much, Jane. I look, simply to say, I think one of the challenges with the rare disease strategy is we had a transformation inside healthcare that fundamentally changed some of the work that had gone on before. And I'm not going to comment on whether that's good or that's bad. The consequence of that is things slow down or get parked. COVID's the great revealer. It's taught us that we can do things much more efficiently, much more quickly, that there's actually things that we can do together in a really incredible way. But it's also done the same thing as that transformation, which is it's concealed things. So we've things like even routine surgeries, right? Things are pushed off, are behind, are put to one side because of the challenges that face us. The question is, how do we get back on that horse and start forward in a way that that's methodical and moves toward the thing we're trying to achieve? Like, what's the next thing that we have to do to start that up again? I'm not going to say that it's stopped, but it's definitely, I mean, you better know this better than my sense is that it's slowed down from the pace it was at. That's a challenge when you have a big, when you take your healthcare system and fundamentally try to change what's gone on before. I would admit a more of an advocate of a different kind of transformation, one that didn't, if you turn the ship too fast, sometimes things fall off the side. And I think that was the challenge here in Ontario. So the question is, the biggest question is for the next government is how do you get started again? Where's the starting point to come back, right? And to make sure that this strategy goes forward.
The Liberals have a strategy. Yeah. You worked on it with Dr. Hoskins, so you guys are pretty much there.
We have it, and I guess what I'm saying in a broader way is like, what's the next most important thing we can do together? I know the whole strategy, but how do you actually start the thing, the next thing that keeps you working together more? So there's a lot in the strategy, and so I'm not inside government right now, so I don't know what initiatives have or haven't been taken by this current government. But it's something that we started, and it's something that we'd like to finish. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. And I know that some of the language around maybe you won't see it in the top 5. That doesn't mean it won't be there, that it won't be part of what we do. It's just, you never know which way the election is going to go, right? I think Franz was trying to say that. So
you never know. But okay, we've got just a few minutes just before I think we're going to be hearing the bells ringing, and I've got in the chat, people are asking just a yes or no, very simple answer. I know politicians hate this. If you form government, Ms. Jana, if the NDP form government, will you bring in a rare diseases strategy, yes or no?
Yes.
Yes, okay, perfect. Mr. Fraser, yes or no, if the Liberals form government?
yes, we started one and we want to finish one.
Okay, so on that positive note, I'm going to let you MPPs go. Unfortunately, we did not hear from Natalia Kusanova. She was supposed to join us, but she got delayed. So we'll let you two go. Get ready for question period. Practice those great questions of yours to hold the government to account. And thank you so much for your participation today on Rare Disease Day. We really appreciate it. So,
My pleasure. Thanks very much.
Thank you. All right. So to everybody else now, we've heard from the politicians, and I just want Durham and Jason and Leanne and Bob to reflect on what you heard. And is there anything in there that sort of sparked your interest, that gives you a lot of optimism? I mean, we did hear that they would bring in a rare disease strategy if they form government, but I did feel at the very beginning they were kind of backing into things a little bit. And so Durham, anything that you took from that conversation?
Well, one of the things I would take is to thank again Franz and John. If we could actually clone them and put them throughout both parties, we would be really great, because they have been long-term supporters. They understand what the issues are. What we're saying with the federal government and their promise of $1 billion to set up, $500 million a year for us.
Well, I think Durham has frozen on us. So let's just, before let's just work on her technology a little bit there, and maybe
that money should not be offset paying for drugs. It's the investment in diagnostics, is investment in centers of excellence, is investment in follow-up. So all of those things is what we are talking about. And I think that is, kind of the essence of it. And no, I think where John is not right is that you can't do it piecemeal. You can't say, well, bring in diagnostics, but we don't have specialists in centers of excellence. We can't say we have centers, but we won't do diagnostics. All of those things come together, and guess what? They can be done together. We have brilliant models that are there already. If we can just need to implement what it is that certainly Ontario started and what we're doing. And we can look at the models that are done internationally. I'm sitting here in Dubai. I'm surrounded by the rare disease community. There is community after community, country after country that has lots of working models. Nobody's perfect, but we have an opportunity to really take the investment that the federal government is promising, and for the promises to take it up and to also contribute to it, and to get contributions also from others. We can actually do this with what is on the table if we invested in the infrastructure. It's an investment. And it's like COVID. The other thing I would say very quickly, Jay, is that if we look at how drugs are funded today, it's exactly what we've got. We've got great managed access programs. We've got great, registries that we're doing it. You can talk to, Dr. Wortley. The problem is that the way in which we do it here, we wait 2, 4, 5, 6, 10 years sometimes to get to the end point. I mean, that's a tragedy. Get to the end point, understand what the right model is, and implement it right away. We know what needs to be done. It's just that we have to do it slowly. We do the advocacy. We have patients that are on the line. We have healthcare professionals on it. We don't need to do that. Just get to the right answer, because we know what the right answer is. And we don't have to force families and physicians to be waiting, to be begging until we get to it. We get to it eventually. It's just that it takes us 10 years.
All right, thank you for that. And Jason, you're digging in on the economics, partly of a strategy. What does Ontario miss out on if we don't, economically, if we don't adopt a strategy like this?
Well, Jane, I think if we've learned anything from COVID-19 is that we don't have a healthy economy and a secure economy without a healthy population. And, you know, the rare disease community is part of that population. They're an important part of that population. But then layer on to that, you know, the research that's also part of our economy and stimulates our economy, and the investments in that research, and then the commercialization of those technologies. You know, Ontario has one of the highest education rates in the OECD. We have great science, we've got great research, but we need to have systems in place to allow that research to translate into innovation, and that innovation needs to be accessible into our health system to benefit patients, particularly in rare disease, right from diagnostics through treatments. So, you know, all of that value chain is there, right? And is a huge opportunity for prosperity in Ontario. So I was encouraged to see and hear, you know, from both of our MPPs that, you know, this was viewed as an investment, not a cost. And I think that that is a big step forward in terms of the mindset within government.
Yeah. Okay, Bob, I'm going to ask you basically the same thing, because you're in that area. You see the effectiveness too of that hub, for instance, in Boston, and how that works well. So just reflect again on what the MPPs had to say and where you see there might be some gaps and where you'd like to address those.
Yeah, I mean, I love to hear certainly politicians talk that language, and you know, there are some that are very active and really push this agenda. I find the challenge is they get, you know, they butt up against walls, and there's a lot of walls and a lot of it's a fractured system. And the system's not well integrated. That's the problem. You know, the provinces, that's where the buck stops. That's where the healthcare is delivered, and that's where it's paid for. So, you know, they literally have kids showing up in wheelchairs at their office, you know, wanting some treatment. So they're in a pickle because CADTH would have said, you know, the drug's not worth it, or you know, we're stuck at PCPA negotiating price. Well, the child and the family are still suffering. And you know, the doctors there and the politicians are there, so there's some decent advocacy at the provincial level. But I think the system is so fractured. You know, I go down to Boston, I talk about Canadian alphabet soup with all the different acronyms of different government bodies and agencies we've got to go through, and the long continuum. It takes, as Durham said, 1 year, 3 years, 5 years to get all these things through. So, you know, again, I've met many people from all the different jurisdictions within government, bureaucrats, policymakers. Generally, they're all good people. With good intentions, but they have to stay in their lane. And it's unfortunate when they just stay in their lane. You know, if it was up to me, I'd do it, but I can't. It's the other department. So you get this runaround. And I'm sure these families, you know, when a child is born with a rare disease, the parent has no clue what to do, where to go, and they start spinning. They call Durham, they call their doctor, they try to figure things out, and often met with wall after wall. And you know, again, that's not a way to treat someone who's been, you know, won the unfortunate genetic lottery. And been affected by a rare disease. So I love the rhetoric, but the follow through, the integration, you know, removing the barriers and silos, and treating rare disease differently, because it really is. We need exceptions, we need flexibility, because every rare disease is different. And when we're in a system that's so rigid, you know, it's round hole, square peg completely every single time.
Oh, well, you don't sound very optimistic. Come on, you're in this business. You should be like, so where do you push? Where's that point where you're going to push, where you think maybe we can see some results and get through that rhetoric?
You know, I never wanted to be that jaded veteran. So I always look at Durham for inspiration. You know, she's been doing this a lot longer than I have, and she always still has that balance and optimism in her voice. No, I am optimistic. And even Durham said, we get there eventually. So that's why we get up every morning and we push for this, because we need, and I always think very purpose driven. I'm no millennial, but I need a job that has purpose. And I think we all have purpose in dealing with rare disease, because we see the need, and we see the effect size of the treatments. We see the number needed to treat as being very small. So it is, you know, so I am optimistic. It's battle after battle, fight after fight, and it does wear you down. But you know, the innovation is there. The science is incredible, what we've come up with. It's just a matter of finding that sustainable funding model. Let's not make it all about money. Let's make it about, you know, unmet medical need, filling that gap. And I think we're there. It's hard, but you know, I think that purpose that we all have certainly drives us forward and keeps us moving.
Yeah, Doctor. Well, thank you. And Dr. Ward, you know, you see every day what that looks like with the patients that you're dealing with. And so, is there one thing that you heard today that you think could help your young patients? Is there something that gives you some optimism for the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think today's conversation had points of encouragement. I think, though, if I may say, there was one thing that I didn't think got enough attention, and that is the following: that when patients have unmet needs in the rare disease space, when they're inadequately treated, they need tremendous resources and access to the healthcare system, multiple surgeries, mental health issues, tremendous need for rehabilitation types of therapies, supportive care. When you move from that model where you're inadequately treating to a model where you're getting it right, you've got a pathobiology targeted treatment, you're getting to the heart of the problem, suddenly they don't need access to the healthcare system anywhere near what they do in the unmet need space. And so I think when we think about the funding for this whole space, we need to be cognizant of the fact that as long as we're dabbling around and not getting to the heart of the problem, it's going to be extremely expensive. And the alternative, I think, ultimately will pay off. The other thing I just want to mention too is that certainly rare disease requires a lot of integrated, coordinated healthcare. But if we can figure it out in that space, I believe that all boats can rise in other areas as well. I think even common diseases have areas that need to be fine-tuned in terms of access to healthcare and delivery of healthcare. And so I'd like to think of this as an all boats rise kind of perspective.
All right, that's great. And Durham, just before we go, I'm just going to ask you the last question, because I want to know where things are federally. Like the promise has been made for a very significant investment, but where exactly are we at with that?
The promise has been made. The promise will be kept because we're not going to let them off the hook. But they have continued to dialogue with us. You know, they made the promise in 2019. We ended up with COVID. They said no consultations. Guess what? The patients and the families court picked up the consultation. We've been driving it for the last 1.5, 2 years, and they're along with us. They have been there for part of it. They agree with a lot of what we say. They're also going to be holding additional meetings. So we are absolutely, I say without any reservation, we are there. It will be delivered. Now, what it will look like, we're not exactly sure, but we do have a commitment, and we have a lot of alignment in terms of what we're looking at, where the investment is going to be in terms of early diagnosis. And, you know, Dr. Wharton made the right point. If we can diagnose that baby with SMA and we diagnose them at birth, they will have no defects. They're not going to be there. We have a young man who took 7 years to get the medication you need to get a kidney transplant. He was on dialysis for 7 years. His kidneys are now fragile. And we finally decided to give him the medication, get him the kidney transplant. Guess what? If we had done that 7 years ago, he would have gone back to work. He would have been healthy. He would have saved us 7 years of dialysis, and he would have saved himself 7 years of misery. The same with the baby, who now is going to be at 2 and 3 in a wheelchair because we didn't get him at birth. We know what the right thing to do is, and where that money's coming in terms of the federal strategy, we hope, is to get the provinces to get on side, to look at what is the optimal way of being able to, what part of what we love to see is some of that money's going into what we call a fund. So that if the therapy is needed, we haven't negotiated the price, we haven't come to it yet, get the companies to chip in, which they have, and Bob says compassionate access, pick up that therapy and get it going without waiting. That's what happens in Germany. That's what happens in the, in other countries. We can do this if there is, as Francis said, a change in terms of the culture. And guess what? I think that's what it's contributing to. And so the important thing, what the federal strategy does, it gives us that opportunity to say, hey, if money is the only problem in terms of investment, the money can be there. And we need, as Jason says, a different mindset. It's an investment. And this is the way we're talking about it internationally. The same as COVID. It's an investment. It's not just, okay, can we put a Band-Aid on it? Can we get ahead of it?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that. And of course, Bob, there's that optimism from Durham that you were referring to. So on that note, this was just a terrific conversation. I want to thank everybody, Dr. Leanne Ward, Bob Mcclay, Durham Von Rieger, and of course, Jason Field. And I'm going to throw it back to you, Jason, for the concluding remarks. Thank you.
And Jane, thank you for a wonderful job as our moderator today. Like, way to ask the tough questions from our political leaders and get some answers that were very encouraging. So well done. Thanks again. It's now my pleasure to actually hand things over to Martin Cho, Head of Patient Value and Access at Takeda, to provide the closing remarks for today's session. So Martin, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Jason. I just want to echo Jason's comments. Jane, you did a fantastic job in moderating and really asking the pointed questions to the MPPs and to the panelists, right? And I think this is really like a spark to the discussion and to the start. And it's been a real engaging discussions and very collaborative. So it's my pleasure today to provide the closing remarks on behalf of Takeda. First of all, I just want to thank LSO and CORD for organizing this event, for bringing the different stakeholders together to talk about the real issues, right? And yes, there are challenges, but then how do we all work together for the best interest of patients and their caregivers in Ontario for those who have rare disease? At Takeda, patients is at the center of what we do. And as a pharmaceutical leader in the rare disease space, we understand how important the strategy is and how really meaningful change they could make for a difference for a patient and their caregivers. I mean, I work in this pharmaceutical space. I read this story a long time ago of a lady in Alberta. Her journey was 12 years, right? Through, like Durant said, about all those, tests and stuff like that. And she had 2 operations unnecessarily, right? And I was kind of thinking about that story, and it gives me the drive to do what we do every day, right? As Takeda too, in December 2021, we launched a report called Strategies for Rare Diseases, an international report, which summarized the best practice from around the world. And we thought this would be a valuable tool. Like Durant said, there are other countries doing things. It might not be perfect, but we could take the learnings from those ones and apply it in Canada. We don't have to recreate the wheel, right? So I thought that was really helpful, what you shared, Durant. And today on World Rare Disease Day, I think this is just a spark to start engaging, discussing how we can make this a reality in the province of Ontario. You heard from the MPPs that they're committed to do what they can. Yes, there will be barriers, but how can we remove the barriers and work together and collaborate? And as well, how do we ensure the Ontario strategy is leading in Canada, and how do we integrate that with the federal work that's being done in the national strategy? I know the MPPs had to leave, but I do want to appreciate, they took the time out of their busy schedules to attend and to engage and to answer the yes and no question that you asked Jane. I was a little bit hesitant whether we'll go away, but they didn't answer, which is great. And we're hopeful that after the election, that they will really, follow up on their commitment and to drive a rare disease strategy in Ontario from all parties. And it's only working all together that this could be a possibility. In terms of Dr. Ward, thank you for sharing your story of, how you practice and how a rare disease strategy could help with your patients. And I like your point about it has to be a coordinated framework approach and not just, individually and a holistic approach. And Bob, thank you for sharing your experience in Boston. And I share your sentiment as well too. The Canadian healthcare system is great, but it is fragmented. And it's very similar to what Dr. Ward said. We need this holistic collaboration approach for innovation and to work together to make this a success for the patients. Durant, I know you mentioned in the brief, you came off a 9-hour moderation session. I really appreciate your energy and passion in the space, and you continue that dedication for patients and your energy level. And like I said earlier, it's just been inspiring to, whenever you share your stories and about those patients that you represent. And Jason, again, thank you for your leadership. I really appreciate your 5 pillars in the Vision 2040. I think that we could make that a reality here in Canada and in Ontario. And, I think someone mentioned earlier, rare disease should not be a burden to the healthcare system, but it's investment, right? Investment in the healthcare system, investment in patients, but also it's investment in economy, right? So how do we create an innovation hub in Ontario that's industry or world leading? That only brings new drugs to market, but also overall helps with the healthcare system. And I think this is just a spark in the beginning of an ongoing dialogue that we have to work together with the federal government. And just speaking of ongoing discussions, on March 3rd, on Thursday, Canada 2020 will be hosting another virtual session called a hopeful future for rare disease in Canada. There'll be speakers like Suzanne McGurn, Michelle Munderhorn, and Duran yourself. I think you'll still be in Dubai, but with virtual, you'll join us. So overall, great discussion. I really feel this is the beginning of something really special in Ontario. And I think the common theme is, we all need to work together to this. And it's a shared responsibility, right? We can't say government should be doing this, so-and-so should be doing this, but we all have a shared accountability to work together to bring this life in Ontario. And lastly, on the Rare Disease Day, I think I'll be remiss if I don't just conclude to say, be rare, be you. Now I'm gonna put this little toucan. There you go, just went and that. So thank you very much, LSO and Court, for the opportunity. Great discussion, and hope you have a great day.
Thanks, Martin. Have a great day, everyone.